We left off last week in Acts chapter 7, and we were in the section about verse 35 through 43. So that's kind of where we'll start. We got down to verse. I think we actually got down to verse 42, and they were fixing to start into the section there on Moloch and the various idols that they worshipped and so forth and so on. But before we get to that, and I don't want to dwell on it, but I do want to mention just one thing that we're talking about whether we can have confidence in the Bible or not. You know, we talked about the translations and the fact that we don't have the original language, or we don't have the original document like what we got, the 66 books right here is not the original document. It's in English. It's translated into English from the Greek, the Hebrew, and the Aramaic. And at some point, I want to spend a little time on that because I was doing a little research on that, and I was going to use it tonight, and I said, no, I'm not going to get bogged down with it, but I brought a couple of Bibles just to illustrate just one aspect of that. Where we're talking about mistakes in the Bible, or we're talking about misspellings of words in the Bible, or we're talking about what brought it up was, you remember when we were talking about what was said there about about Jacob's about the situation with Abraham purchasing the property, or Jacob purchasing a piece of property, and so forth. And how could that be? How is it possible for that to be in the King James Bible when it's not that way? And that was kind of what brought that up. And several other things in that context, what Stephen said, and people say, well, Stephen made a mistake in that. Well, and we tried to explain 3 or 4 of those things, and then this one about Abraham and Jacob is point blank. So how do you explain it? I mean, that's the whole point. How do you explain that? It's a mistake, so how do you explain it? And the only way you could explain it would be to go back to whoever copied it. Then it comes down in the manuscripts, it comes down in the translations in English. When it got to English, then that's the way that it was, and just stayed that way for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So it wasn't corrected because it was the original translation, and then when somebody translated from a translation, it still says Abraham, or it still says Jacob. And I went back and started looking at the 2 or 3 things. I want to read just a couple of reasons I brought these old Bibles. This is I mentioned this earlier to Lloyd and Bill. This is my old Bible from 1954 from Paul LaRue.
Is that the one that you said that Paul himself gave you?
Yes.
Paul.
Oh, the Apostle Paul. Paul, but not Paul the Apostle.
He's pretty old, but he doesn't go quite back that far.
Don't go back quite that far. But what I wanted to, the very first page says this, and this is what, this is the kind of thing that I just kind of want to emphasize, because if you go back to the original, and I'll read 2 or 3 verses here in just a second. I know you guys know this, and I'm preaching to the choir. But when you go to the original text, there are no mistakes in the Bible. It can't be. If it was in the, if Paul said it through inspiration, it has to be true, or none of it's true. Would you agree with that? Moses said it, it has to be true. In other words, if God spoke to Moses, Moses said it, it has to be true. My point is that when it got translated, then somebody used a different word, or and that sort of thing. So, but we can have confidence in it. And I'm not going to read it tonight because it's it's 2 or 3 paragraphs. The preservation of the Bible, and so forth in this Dixon Bible, which is a really good explanation of it. But I'm going to do that at some point in the future. I don't want to get bogged down on it, but I did want to mention that because we talked about it a little bit last week. And here's what it says on the first page. The Holy Bible, containing the Old and New Testaments, translated out of the original tongues, and with the former translations, diligently compared and revised. Did you get that? Get that reading? Diligently compared and revised. And it's got the authorized King James Version. Of course, this was the 1611 version. Now, in the And this is the King James also, but on the first page it says this. I want to read just a couple of just brief things. The New Analytical Bible and Dictionary of the Bible, authorized King James Version with the addition in many instances within brackets of the more correct renderings of the American Standard Version 1901. So you can see it's again, it's a translation. It's not the original, of course, and we know that, but I just want to mention that. And I'll just read one more, and then I'll read just a couple of verses here in just a second, and then we'll get into our reading there in Acts 7. But I didn't want to leave it hanging because I'm going to be gone for 3 or 4 weeks, and I just wanted to make mention of the fact that I believe every word of it is true. The thing about it is, and I know you do too, if I didn't believe it was true, I wouldn't believe any of it. If I didn't believe all of it was true, I wouldn't believe any of it. I'll be honest with you. So it's true, but the thing is, when it's translated, if you translated something from Russian into Chinese, it's not a word for word, and Israel made this point, made an excellent point last week. It's not a word for word translation. So if you have the Greek into, what about translating Hebrew into Greek? The Greek Septuagint version. Or you translate Greek into Spanish. It's not a word-for-word translation. And I don't know how many languages you got in the world, but you got 200 countries, and you got all kinds of languages and dialects within those countries. So you don't get an exact word-for-word translation all the time. So sometimes it seems to be saying something it doesn't say. And here's this statement right here. The text used in this Bible is that of the Authorized Version, commonly known as the King James Version, 1611. It is generally recognized that this translation contains many obsolete words and others whose meaning has changed during the more than 350 years it has held sway. Well, it's held sway 410 years now, because this was written about 1973, thereabouts. To clarify the meaning of such difficult words and phrases, the New Analytical Bible has added to the text, within brackets, more than 5,500 other renderings, chiefly from the American Standard Version 1901. So it goes back again to a more recent translation. It is to the distinct advantage of the reader to have these renderings appear within the text itself, because it enables him to see at a glance the modern translation of an obsolete word or phrase. So I just wanted to make mention of that, not to belabor the point and not to get into a lot of complicated things, but you can kind of understand. I know that y'all know that, but I didn't want to leave it hanging that there are mistakes in the Bible that that's going to cause us major problems or cause us to misunderstand it, because there are many misunderstandings about the Bible. Why do we have 2,000 or ever how many it is different religious organizations in the world? Because of people putting a different interpretation on it, or different reading or different rendering of a particular passage, and making it saying something that it doesn't say. Just like the doctrine of original sin, or that we inherit Adam's sin, or predestination, to the point that Lloyd is chosen but Charlie's not, Wayne's chosen but Scott's not. That sort of thing, that people will look at something, look at a verse, and either misread it or misquote it or misunderstand it, and that sort of thing. You have quite a bit of that. While I'm turning to a couple of them, Lloyd, you had a comment, so go ahead.
A few years ago, Lester, I don't know if it's something you brought or something we were studying. We had some copy of the Old English.
Old English. Yep.
You could not read it even though it was English.
Even though it was English.
That's understood what it said.
That's right.
So I would think it'd be very easy to misinterpret the words.
And that goes back to, and I'm going to get into some of that down the road in a few weeks, but Lloyd's exactly right. And I think part of that was the Wycliffe Bible was one of them. And which was written in 1300s during about the same time that Beowulf was written, and a poem that, what was that, the Canterbury Tales and Beowulf, and trying to think of the author. Who is the author of Beowulf?
Geoffrey Chaucer.
Chaucer, yeah, Geoffrey Chaucer. I studied that one time back at Southeastern. I forgot. So you have those, but the language, like Lloyd said, even in English, we're not talking about the Greek and trying to understand Greek, and and that, but just translate it into the English, and you see, as a matter of fact, I passed it around the class, and you guys couldn't read the Old English, and neither could I, because of the words and the way it was said. All right, here's what Peter said, just real quick, a couple of them real quick. 2 Peter 1, 21. For the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man, but notice, but holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. Well, if the Holy Ghost moved them to speak, is it right or is it not right? It is right. It is right. Second, and all you guys know all these passages, but I want to just make sure that I'm reading it right. Most of us could quote most of it. 2 Timothy 3, 16, that all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect or complete, thoroughly furnished unto all good work. So, do I have what I need to have to thoroughly furnish me unto all good works? Absolutely. I believe that we do, and I know that you believe that we do. Let me just read two others real quick, and both of these are in Galatians. This is Galatians 1, 11, and 12. Here's what Paul said to the churches of Galatia. But I certify you, brethren, in other words, this is the way it has to be. This is it. This is certified. If something is certified, it's pretty, what's another word, Bill? It's certified. It's factual. All right, look at this. But I certify you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man, for I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ. And one more, while we're in that same book, Galatians 2, verses 1 and 2. Then 14 years after, I went up to Jerusalem with Barnabas, and took Titus with me also. And I went up by revelation, and communicated with them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles. So I went up, I did it by revelation. In other words, it was revealed to me. So when Paul spoke it, you know, there wasn't any question about whether it was from God or not. As a matter of fact, he had to prove, because of the signs and wonders and miracles, all the things that he did, to certify, to verify that what he was saying was true, and it was exact. And in 2 Peter 1, one other passage was he gives us all things that pertain to life and godliness. Well, are all of the things in here, or some of it's been left out or added? They're all here. They're all here. He gives us all things that pertain to life and godliness. So I just want to make sure that I clarified that, and I know that you guys know that. But what happens a lot of times is somebody puts a different stamp on it, or a different reading, or different interpretation, as it will, and that sort of thing, and kind of muddies the water and makes it say something that it actually doesn't say. All right, any thoughts on that before we get into Acts 7? I didn't want to belabor the point, but I did want to kind of follow up with what we were talking about toward the end of class last week. All right, Acts 7, down about verse, let's go to verse 35. I think we read this through 43. I think Dal finished up with us, if I remember correctly, through verse 43. And this is kind of what we want to start with. So he's talking about Moses, and Stephen is saying what God said to Moses there in verse 34, that I've seen the affliction of my people, I've heard their groaning, I'm going to deliver them, you're the one that's going to do it. And so he's telling, Stephen is telling these people, he's bringing them up to where they rejected Christ, Moses being a type of Christ, as Joseph was a type of Christ. They rejected Joseph, the people in his day, his brothers, rejected him, but God used him to save his people, not only just Jacob's family, but save the Jewish people. They rejected him. So he's used in the Old Testament examples, and Joel mentions it from time to time, about the things that were written aforetime are written for our learning. So he's telling them, he's going back to the Old Testament, all the way back to the time of Jacob, Joseph, and even before that to Abraham, and tells them that Joseph was rejected. Now Moses was rejected. They rejected him. Notice verse 35. This Moses, whom they refused, saying, who made thee a ruler and a judge. In other words, you remember that in Exodus chapter 2, and I think we referred to that, Exodus chapter 2, where it talks about the birth of Moses and how he was hid and so forth, and then when he became of age and everything, and right before he left, I guess he was about 40 at the time that this occurred, he went out and saw an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, and then he defended him and so forth, and then this was known. He was run out, and then that same Hebrew person asked this question: who made thee a ruler and a judge? And then of course he left. But what Stephen is saying, the same did God send, talk about the same as Moses, did God send to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel which appeared to him in the bush. And we talked about that a little bit. And then in the next verse, he brought them out after that he had showed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, and in the Red Sea and in the wilderness 40 years, just all the things that Moses did, those 10 plagues, plus the crossing of the Red Sea, the parting of the water, all of this. He's relating all this now to these people, that God delivered them through Moses. And then verse 37, this is that Moses which said to the children of Israel, in other words, they can't deny the thing about Moses. They can't deny the thing about Joseph. They can't deny what he said about Abraham. All of this was in their history and so forth. They knew all of this. So he's pointing out, leading up to the Christ, this is that Moses which said to the children of Israel, a prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you. In other words, the people he's speaking to, of your brethren, in other words, a Jew, like unto me, him shall ye hear. In other words, this is the one that you're going to have to listen to. This is the one you're going to have to pay attention to. And he's talking about Jesus. This one you're going to have to listen to. This is the one. Now, they were to hear Moses. Moses gave them the law. They were to hear Moses. And so now he's saying that you in your day has to hear the one that God raised up like Moses, which is Christ. This is he. And he's going back to Moses again. Verse 38. This is he that was in the church in the wilderness with the angel which spake to him in Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the lively oracles to give unto us. In other words, the 10 Commandments. And we know the history of that. We won't go into all that. In verse 39, to whom our fathers would not obey. But and I want to look at this in a little bit more depth here from 39 through 43 about the things that they said about the various idols, Moloch, and things he mentioned down in verse 43. To whom our fathers would not obey, but thrust him from them, and in their hearts turned back again into Egypt. Over and over, what they say. Why did you bring us out here to die in this wilderness? We have nothing to eat. We don't like what we're eating. We eat the same manna over and over and over. You brought us out to kill us with thirst over and over. That's what they said. We'll look at a couple of passages here in just a second. And in their heart, they turned back into Egypt. In other words, that's what they wanted to do. Of course, they didn't at that point in time, but they didn't return to Egypt at all at that point in time, even though, in a sense, they did, because they were led into captivity. The Assyrian captivity and Babylonian captivity were pretty tough. Saying unto Aaron, in other words, when Moses went up to give him the law, make us gods to go before us, for as for this Moses, which brought us out of the land of Egypt, we wot not, or we don't know what is become of him. They made a calf in those days, offered sacrifice unto the idol, rejoiced in the works of their own hands. They were singing and dancing and playing and having a good time. And of course, when Moses came down from the mountain, then he broke the 2 tables that God had written with his own finger, and broke them under the mountain there. And then you got the calf and ground it up and made them drink of it. You know, we know the whole story there. Then God turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven. And he had told them before, you don't worship anything in heaven, anything in the earth, anything in the sea, nothing that creeps on the earth. You don't worship any of the, you don't, God's give the sun and moon and the stars to everybody, so you don't worship any of that, but that's what they did, to worship the host of heaven, as is written in the book of the prophets, O ye house of Israel, have you offered to me slain beasts and sacrifices by the space of 40 years in the wilderness? Well, they did. They did everything wrong, even during that period of time. And of course, because of their disobedience and not going into the land, God killed all the men above the age of 20. But here's what they did, verse 43. Ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, figures which you made to worship them, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon. So he's kind of forecasting, some of the things that's going to happen to them as a result of what they did. I want to look at just a few verses real quick. You know, the Israelite nation, just like we do today, we have a choice to obey God. We have a choice not to obey God. Even though the Israelites were God's chosen people, he didn't make them obey him. You know, he said, he gave them a choice, just like you and I. We are God's chosen people today, right? The Christians are. We have a choice, though. He doesn't twist our arm and make us obey him. And Moses told them, after he had given all the commands, after he had told them, what was going to happen to them, I'm going to set before you a blessing and a curse, and so forth and so on. If you live right and do right, here's the way you're going to be blessed. If you don't, here's the way you're going to be cursed. He laid it all out for them, all the way through, from Exodus right on through Deuteronomy, and that we mentioned the other day, that last great speech that he made in Deuteronomy, which is the whole speech, the whole chapter, is that great speech right before they went into the promised land. Of course, Joshua led them into the promised land. He wasn't able to do that. But here's what Moses told them. Let me read just a couple of them just real quick. Y'all jump in anytime. Deuteronomy 30 is amazing to me, and we've talked about the Israelite people before, of how could they be so disobedient to God when God had blessed them and they had seen so many things in a miraculous way that he had done for them. All those 10 plagues. Just think, Bo, if you'd have seen all those 10 plagues, and here we were across the Red Sea, and you saw that sea parted, and I've heard Joel say sometimes it was like 17 miles coming down from where, the river is flowing like this, and then all of a sudden it parts, and you walk through on dry ground, and then you get to the other side, and then you look back, and they said when they looked back and they saw them, they were all dead, every one of those dead. All the things that God did for them, and then the blessing, that manna that came down from heaven, the quails that came down from heaven, all they had to do is go out and pick it up, and over and over and over, then they still doubted God after they saw it. You know, we talked before about if we could just see a miracle, Lord, that would make us love God more and obey him, wouldn't it?
You would think so.
You would think so. You would think so. They saw it all. They saw it all. And Moses chided them about that. But here's what he said about them. Let me read Deuteronomy 30 and verse 19. I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I've set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. Joshua told them the same thing after they had gone into the promised land. He said, choose you this day. And we're all familiar with that passage, Joshua 24 and verse 15. Choose you this day whom you serve. And he goes on, you're going to serve the gods that your father served on the other side of the flood. You're going to choose to serve the true God. As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. We'll serve God. But back to the point. I want to get to a couple in Deuteronomy just real quick. In Deuteronomy, let me just read all of them there. Deuteronomy 31:27. Here's what he said about them. this is he's finishing up his speech, and here's what he says about it. Deuteronomy 31:27. For I know thy rebellion and thy stiff neck. And it's interesting, Stephen uses the same word there, you stiff neck and uncircumcised in heart and so forth. Behold, while I am yet alive with you this day, notice it, you have been rebellious against the Lord, and how much more after my death. And then two others real quick, and both of these in Deuteronomy chapter 9. And he tells them what they were like, but he tells them they had a choice to make. Deuteronomy 9 and verse 7. Remember, this is the same speech that I quoted from in chapter 31, but this is early in the speech in Deuteronomy 9. Remember and forget not how thou provokest the Lord thy God to wrath in the wilderness. Notice it, from the day that thou didst depart out of the land of Egypt until you came unto this place, you have been rebellious against the Lord. And in that same chapter, in verse 24, he says this, you have been rebellious against the Lord from the day that I knew you. Summed it up, didn't he? So, and then we'll go back, and I won't go back to all these verses, but I do want to read just a couple real quick. In Exodus 16:3, I won't go back and read that one, but if those of you taking notes, Exodus 16:3 and Exodus 17:3, he talks about the fact that they were displeased, they were murmuring, complaining about you brought us out here, to die and so forth and so on. But I do want to read just a couple in Numbers. Over in Numbers, there's about three of them, I think. Numbers 20 and verse 1 beginning. Then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, to the desert of Zin in the first month. The people abode in Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried. There was no water for the congregation, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and Aaron. They chode with Moses. Would God we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. And why have you brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? And then look at back in Numbers 14, and beginning in verse 1, I believe. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried. The people wept that night. And then it's in verse 2, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? Either one's better than where we are right now. And why have you brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return to Egypt? This is after they had seen the 10 plagues. They got to the Red Sea, and then they see Pharaoh and his army back there.
Part of their wish, they did die in the wilderness.
Yeah, they did. They got part of it. Yeah, and so then they said, and this is where Stephen said that in their heart they went back to Egypt. Look at verse 4 of Numbers 14. And they said one to another, let us make a captain and let us return into Egypt. So in the heart, that's what they did. They actually didn't do it, but that in their heart they did. And then one more just real quick. Numbers 11, verse 1, it says, and when the people complained, it displeased the Lord. Or they were complaining all the time. And the Lord heard it. His anger was kindled. The fire of the Lord burned among them, consumed them. They were uttermost parts of the camp. Moses prayed to the Lord. The fire was quenched. And he called the name of the place Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. They fell a-lusting and said, who shall give us flesh to eat? Verse 4. We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now our soul is dried away. There's nothing at all beside this manna before our eyes. So all through, and that's the point that Stephen is making, that all through the history of the Israelite nation, what did they do? Murmured, complained, never satisfied, saw what God did to them. They turned their back on God over and over and over. So much so that in the next verse, look at back to our reading real quick, in Acts 7. what it says that besides the murmuring and complaining, the other thing that they did is they turned to idols. Not only did they murmur and complain against Moses, Joshua, and everybody else that tried to lead them for the next at least 1,000, 1,100 years. We don't know about the last 400 years. The Bible is silent there, but at least 1,000, 1,100 years, they complained and murmured and complained all through their history. And then in verse 43 of Acts 7, yea, you took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, figures which you made to worship them, and so forth. Now, back to Moloch, just a couple of things. I want to, Lord, when we were talking before about wish that God had made things plainer. You know, when we talk about the Israelite nation, I want you to look what he says here just real quick if I can find it. Leviticus 18:21. Leviticus 18:21. Now, Moses is given the law there in Exodus, and now a lot of the things that the outgrowth of the law here, he's telling them how to act and how to behave and what to do and what not to do and so forth. And he's spelling it out in more detail besides the Ten Commandments. And in Leviticus 18:21, and thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech, neither shalt thou profane the name of the Lord, the name of God, I am the Lord. He even spelled out the idol that they were not to have anything to do with. And then in Leviticus 20, in verse 2, he repeats it. Again, thou shalt say, and this is the Lord talking, this is the Lord. He said, and the Lord spake to Moses, saying, again, thou shalt say to the children of Israel, whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stone. He told them point blank. And then, so what is Stephen saying? You took up the tabernacle of Molech, you worshiped them and so forth. God had told him, even named this God. Don't do that. And we talked about it last week. And it wasn't just Moloch, and some of the spelling is Molech, M-O-L-E-C-H. So you may say it in your Bible both ways, M-O-L-O-C-H, M-O-L-E-C-H. In addition to that, we mentioned last week gods like Ashtoreth, Chemosh, Milcom, Baal, of course, was the biggie, Dagon, Jupiter, Mercury, Diana, and just a couple others in that connection with the gods itself. In Deuteronomy 4, and we won't read all of these, but I did want to read just one more maybe about that, because he repeats it over and over. In Deuteronomy 4, down about verse 25, in the same big speech that he makes, he says this, Deuteronomy 4:25, when thou shalt beget children and children's children, and you remain long in the land, and shall corrupt yourselves, in other words, he's warning them, corrupt yourselves, and make a graven image, or the likeness of anything, and shall do evil in the sight of the Lord thy God, to provoke him to anger. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that you shall soon utterly perish from off the land, whereunto ye go over Jordan to possess it. You shall not prolong your days upon it. You shall be utterly destroyed. And the Lord shall scatter you among the nations. You be left few in number among the heathen, whither the Lord shall lead you. And there you shall serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. And he repeats the same thing, those of you taking notes, in Exodus 22-5. He has almost the same terminology. And also just one chapter over in Deuteronomy 5:7-9, he says the same thing. And then one more, if that's not good enough for them, he says, here's what he says in Leviticus earlier, Leviticus 26 and verse 1. You shall make no idols. He'd already told him in Exodus 20, you not have any gods before me. You don't make any idols in your land of anything that's in the sky, anything that's in the earth, anything that's in the sea. He even enumerates all of it. But here he says, Leviticus 26:1, you shall make you no idols, nor graven image, neither rear you up a standing image, neither yet shall you set up any image of stone in your land to bow down unto it, for I am the Lord your God. And over, God tells them what he expects, but then what did they do? They forsook it over and over for a period of at least 1,000 years, 1,100 years, as we said, to go beyond or to come up short. And the thing about it is, from our standpoint, is we're warned the same way. You know, not to add to it, not to take anything away from it. Matter of fact, about the last thing that's said in the New Testament is what? Don't add any in Revelation 22. Don't add anything to it. God's going to add to you the plagues that are written in this book. Don't take anything away from it, lest he take your name out of the book of life and so forth. The last couple of verses there, Revelation 22, 18, 19, or thereabouts. So we have the same, we have the same admonition today. So but that's what they were doing. And then this rim fan, I was looking that up. I was going to read just. I brought it last week, but I didn't read it because it goes into detail about Moloch, the god of the Amorites. That most say that was one of the things that they did, burning the children to the fire. And Molech, they were doing that in honor of Molech, to burn the children to Molech. And Elaine did some research on this some time back. And she said that it was something about the god would have the hands held out like that, and it was almost as if, you know, the god was welcoming the children, burning them up, and so forth, and they would get far enough away that the parents couldn't hear the screams of the kids being burned up, and God detested that. He said that never entered my mind, never once, and yet that's what they were doing. And they were warned about it over and over, and of course, God punished them for it. But that's what they were doing. And this rim fan that he mentions here, oh my goodness, Bell's already got me. It said the star of your God, rim fan. One of the B.W. Johnson said that this was some planet worshipped as a god. So it's something in the sky. You know, there are different ones mentioned, Arcturus, Pleiades, some of the others that are mentioned in the Bible about it. And Remphan evidently was a planet, or that it's not one of the 8 or 9 that we have today in the universe that we named, but that's evidently that's what it was some type of planet that they worshiped, in addition to Moloch and several others. Go ahead, Charlie. Sorry.
All right, when you talk about complaining, it says in Lamentations 3:39, wherefore doeth a living man complain, a man for the punishment of his sins?
Yeah, and Philippians 2:14, do all things without murmurings and complaining. But that came hundreds of years after the Israelites, so they didn't know that verse. But you and I know that verse, right? Thank you, guys. Appreciate it very much.